Well, good morning, everyone. This is Reverend Derwin Kostanak from the Church of the Good Shepherd talking to you when normally I would be doing so live and in person. Obviously, we've heard the news that because of COVID-19, the Diocese of Calgary has decided that the best course of action, the most responsible course of action for us, is to suspend church services until the end of March at the very, very least. We'll keep you updated as to what will take place as we move into April, and of course how that will affect Holy Week and the finishing of the season of Lent and all that is ahead. We'll cross those bridges as we come to them. But as it stands this morning, I thought it might be a good idea to at least share with you a bit of a devotional thought about what my sermon was going to be about today. Rather than having completely nothing at all as far as church is concerned today, at the very least we could have some thoughts from an important passage of Scripture, an important story from the Gospel of John, one that has been used on several occasions to teach so many different things. And so this morning we consider the Gospel reading from John chapter 4. Those of you who have been around the Bible a few times might remember that this is the passage, of course, where Jesus speaks to a Samaritan woman. And it is one that, as I said earlier, has been used to speak to so many different issues, not the least of which is a way of trying to share one's faith. If you imagine Jesus, for example, taking the opportunity to speak to someone about the good news, and that is part of the take that I want to do this morning, but with a bit of a different approach in this way. The focus here is on the one to whom he is speaking. Here we want to look more closely at this woman that he comes across, and by looking at who she is, understanding who Jesus is, and the time that Jesus takes with her, I would suggest to you, to encourage us when we consider our approach to Jesus, or rather, Jesus' approach to us. So to set up the story, let us just understand what's going on here. Jesus is traveling from Judea in the southern part of Israel and making his way to the north, to Galilee. In order to get from Judea to Galilee, there is this region of Israel that is simply known as Samaria. And Samaria is where the Samaritans live. Now, Jews going from the south to the north and vice versa wanted to avoid Samaria most of the time. They would, rather than just take the short route and go straight through the region, because of the conflict they had with the Samaritans, they would rather head off to the east and go to the opposite side of the Jordan River and make their way up alongside the river before coming back across into Galilee. This would add perhaps twice the distance to their trip as it normally would. That was what they would normally do because of this conflict with the Samaritans. Jesus didn't do that, though. He and his disciples decided to go straight through the area, and we are told that as Jesus was journeying, he got tired. It was the middle of the day, and he decided to take a rest. And he located himself at Jacob's well, this well that would have been dug by the patriarch Jacob about 1,500 years earlier, and it was there that he decided to rest while his disciples went in to go and get some food. And it was in this scenario, high noon in a hot place, that he is visited by a woman from Samaria. And so when she comes, he does what one would expect he would do, in the sense of one who's resting by a well. He asks if she might give him a drink of water. And that launches into a remarkable dialogue. A dialogue where Jesus ends up telling her about this living water, this metaphor he uses that he is saying he is there to offer. Something that is obviously meant to be desirable, something that he offers to her and talks to her about. But the remarkable piece of the story is the fact that he would be offering this to her at all. Here's the thing. The moment Jesus spoke with her and asked for water, she recognized that this isn't what would typically happen. She makes the remark herself. She says, "Why is it that you, a Jew, would be talking to me, a Samaritan woman, and actually asking me for something?" And in starting with that self-definition, we see the remarkable piece in this story. There are several reasons we could say why it is that it would be a problem that Jesus would speak to this person at all. And so let's break down what it is that's going on with her. The first thing is that she is a Samaritan. As I've already said, the Jews and the Samaritans didn't see eye to eye, and the reason for that is simply because the Samaritans were not seen to be pure-blooded Jews. They had a Jewish heritage, coming from the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, But when the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians back in 722 BC, these people either did not get carried away in exile or were sent back to repopulate the region by the Assyrians, and in so doing did not keep to the strict observance of the Torah and ended up marrying people outside of their Jewish heritage, thereby not maintaining the pure-blooded Jewishness of their identity. Because this had happened, Jews that were maintaining that purity, if you will, looked down on the Samaritans, saw them as half-breeds, saw them as ones who weren't taking the Torah seriously, and thought that it would be best to avoid them because to associate with ones like that would be to make oneself impure and no longer qualified to enter the temple. They would have to go through a process of purification again. And so the woman says, how can you speak to me? You're Jewish, I'm Samaritan. We don't have any dealings together. I'm from the wrong kind of the family, the wrong kind of family. I'm from the wrong neighborhood. You could say I come from the wrong side of the tracks. Evidently, Jesus didn't care that she was a Samaritan. And so despite the fact that was her identity, didn't matter to Jesus. He spoke with her. He asked her for water. He went on to tell her about the living water that he had to offer. He shared with her, this Samaritan, the same message that he was already sharing with the Jews. The second point that she makes about herself is that she's a woman. And here Jesus, who is a rabbi type person, he's clearly a teacher, he's one that is out to teach others. And the practice for rabbis of the day was that they would be very, very careful to make sure that they were doing things rightly, that they would be above reproach. And so the idea that a rabbi would ever speak one-on-one with a woman alone, that just would never happen. So here the second thing that is the problem, this woman is saying, is that she herself is a woman. And so this man is talking to her and they're alone and this could be bad. You know, she's the wrong kind of person. People might get the wrong idea if Jesus was to be found speaking to her in this way. And indeed, that's something that the disciples say later on when they come back, having gotten some food in town. They were amazed to see that Jesus was talking to a woman. But again, Jesus didn't care. He wasn't worried about what people might think. He wasn't there concerned about the appearances and this kind of thing. He knew that he was doing something that was right and good and on the up and proper and all of that. And even though she even said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" in a manner of speaking, he said, "Absolutely. Let me tell you about this living water that I want to offer to you." So far there's 2 strikes against this person being able to hear from Jesus at all. She's thinking he shouldn't be talking to me because, number one, I'm a Samaritan, I'm the wrong family, the wrong neighborhood, the wrong side of the tracks, and yet Jesus speaks to me anyway. I am also a woman. I am the wrong kind of person. People might get the wrong idea, and yet Jesus is speaking to her anyway. Well, when she becomes curious about this living water that Jesus is speaking about, Jesus says to her, "Let me tell you about it. First go and get your husband and then come back." And she says, "Well, I don't have a husband." Jesus says, "You're right. The truth is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with right now is not your husband." And right there, she recognizes that Jesus is now more than simply a rabbi kind of person. He's more than just a teacher. He is a prophet. He has received revelation from God. He knows something about her that he would not otherwise have known. And she accurately recognizes him as a prophet, which now ramps things up that much more. She's now hearing from someone who is not just a rabbi, but someone who has had things revealed to him by God. And so now she's speaking to a prophet. This is an amazing privilege, an amazing opportunity. It's something that has been longed for hundreds of years. And it has also been made clear that she's not quite living the right way that she's supposed to. Now, there's 2 ways to take this revelation that she has had 5 husbands and is not currently living with a man who is her husband. The traditional way to take this is that this woman is quite immoral. She's going through men like there's no tomorrow, one man after another. She's had 5 husbands, and now she's just shacked up with a guy. That's the traditional way to take it. If that is the correct way to take it, then what we see here is, despite the fact that this is a woman who apparently is immoral, again, Jesus doesn't care. He isn't making an issue of her serial polygamy, if you will, that her perpetual adultery. That's not what Jesus cares about at this point. If this is indeed an example of a woman being immoral, it doesn't matter. Jesus is saying, I want to share with you this living water. In fact, go and get someone else to join with you. Go and get the one you're living with. It doesn't matter. He's still going to offer this to her. And so her immorality, if that's what's going on here, is just not an issue. She still qualifies to engage with Jesus, for Jesus to speak with her and to offer this to her. But there's another take on this scenario. The Torah always says that here is how a man divorces his wife. You don't really see any provision for a woman to divorce her husband. That means back in that day, it was the man who would initiate divorce. The woman didn't initiate divorce. So if this woman has had 5 husbands, what that actually means then is that she has been divorced by 5 men. That she has been rejected by 5 men, that you could say she has been used and abused by 5 men. She is the one who keeps on being cast aside. In which case, we are not looking at a woman who is immoral, but a woman who's being used up, a woman who is being rejected repeatedly. And so now she's living with a man who is not her husband. What does that scenario mean? Is she just simply latched onto someone because, of course, to be unmarried, to be divorced is an economic challenge in that day? Is she just simply making do as best she can? Is she simply trying to survive? That may well be what this situation is. Would also explain why she's coming to draw water in the middle of the day when it's so hot, rather than being in the evening when everyone else would come and all the women would come and gather this water and socialize and talk with each other and catch up. Here she's coming by herself because she's the unwanted one. She's the stained one. She is the rejected one. And Jesus talks to her. And Jesus values her. And Jesus says, let me give you living water. Let me give you something that you don't have. And so whether we see the woman as an immoral one going through men like crazy, or what I think is more accurate, seeing her as this used up woman, this abused woman, this rejected woman, this woman who probably has no positive self-esteem left, Jesus says to her, let me give you something that never ends. Final thing that we can see that would disqualify this woman, it seems, to be able to speak to Jesus, is that she worships differently. She worships on the wrong mountain. As a Samaritan, she worships God on Mount Gerizim instead of Mount Zion, where Jerusalem is. She brings up this point, wanting some clarification, and Jesus acknowledges that there is some challenge with the way the Samaritans are worshiping. He is saying salvation comes from the Jews, but very quickly he says, look, the point, though, is not to show how we are different and distinct and how there is division between us, but there is coming a day, and indeed it has already come, he says, that you're not going to worship on this mountain or that mountain, Mount Zion, Mount Gerizim. It all doesn't matter, because God is spirit, and those that worship God worship in spirit and in truth. And God is seeking true worshipers. And he's looking at this woman who is a Samaritan, wrong family, wrong neighborhood, wrong side of the tracks, who is a woman, the wrong kind of person. People might get the wrong idea that Jesus is talking to her. Someone who's had 5 husbands, either going through men like crazy or being rejected by men repeatedly, and now one who worships differently or uses the wrong liturgy at the wrong church, if you will, whatever. And he says, doesn't matter. What you need to know is that I am here. She says, well, once the Messiah comes, then we'll know for sure. And he says, that's exactly who I am. The one you have been longing for, the one you have been waiting for, the one of promise is right before you now and is speaking to you. Here's the thing. For all of the things that were going against this woman, all the reasons why Jesus ought not to speak with her, let me simply ask this question. Do we ever feel that for some reason we wouldn't qualify to have Jesus engage with us? Do we ever feel that there's something about us that would make Jesus pass us by? Some reason why we ought not to think that we could receive anything from the Lord? If that is the case for you, if that might be what goes through your mind from time to time, let me urge you to look at this Samaritan woman in John chapter 4 and realize that if she qualified 100% to have Jesus speak to her, well, so do you. That there is no reason to think that Jesus wouldn't engage with you, that Jesus wouldn't offer you that living water, that Jesus wouldn't listen to your prayers, that Jesus would not respond to you when you come to him in prayer, that Jesus would be nothing more than happy to share with you the living water that he has for you. The Bible tells us in Romans that nothing can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. And John chapter 4 demonstrates that in spades. So if this morning you feel at all that for some reason, why would Jesus pay attention to me? Let this story be an indication that he does pay attention to you, that you are worth it, and that his offer is to you just as it is to everyone else. And there's no reason to think otherwise. Be encouraged. Know the love of God shown through Christ. Know that you are never alone, and know that he is with you always. Amen.